We're also going to talk about legislation I introduced this week to protect Christians in Nigeria. Nigeria has seen a persecution of Christians that has been staggering. Just this week, over 60 people were murdered by jihadists, by radical Islamists in northeastern Nigeria. They executed soldiers. They went house to house. This pattern of targeting Christians, targeting Catholic priests, targeting individual men, women, and children is horrific. And my legislation would put real consequences on the government of Nigeria and those who are facilitating this persecution, put real consequences on them to change that.
The full details of Senator Ted Cruz's Nigeria Religious Freedom Accountability Act of 2025, Senate Bill S-2747, what it would do, what its implications are, and what controversies or gaps critics have noted, what the bill is and what it proposes. Name of bill: Nigeria Religious Freedom Accountability Act of 2025. Sponsor of the bill: Senator Ted Cruz, Republican senator from Texas. Status: introduced in the U.S. Senate on September 9, 2025, read twice, and referred to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Key provisions. Here are the main provisions of the bill. Number 1. Designation as Country of Particular Concern, CPC. The bill requires the U.S. Secretary of State to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern under the International Religious Freedom Act on account of systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom. Number 2. Sanctions on Nigerian officials. Targeted sanctions are to be imposed on Nigerian officials who are found to be facilitating or tolerating violence against Christians and other religious minorities by Islamist terrorist groups, enforcing or maintaining Sharia law and/or blasphemy laws. This includes public advocacy, legislative or executive actions, or judicial or law enforcement actions tied to those laws. The sanctions envisioned include travel bans, asset freezes, etc. Number 3. Designation of extremist groups. The bill mandates that Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa remain designated as entities of particular concern, EPCs, under U.S. law. Number 4. Retroactive accountability. One notable feature is that the bill allows for sanctionable behavior going back 10 years prior to its enactment. That means officials who in the past decade have promoted or maintained blasphemy laws or tolerated religiously motivated violence could be subject to sanctions. Number 5. Reporting requirements. The Secretary of State is required to submit an annual report to Congress listing Nigerian persons identified under the sanctions provisions. There is a definition of blasphemy laws in the bill that refers to provisions in Nigerian criminal, penal, or Sharia codes that criminalize expression, behavior, or belief perceived as insulting religion. Number 6. Waivers/conditions. There is a waiver possibility. The bill allows the Secretary of State to waive some of the negative designations, e.g. CPC status, if Nigeria meets certain conditions, such as ceasing enforcement of blasphemy laws, or if extremist groups are no longer active. Statistics and context cited in the bill's advocacy. To justify this bill, supporters cite a number of troubling facts and trends. Since 2009, more than 52,000 Christians have allegedly been murdered by jihadist or extremist groups in Nigeria. Over 20,000 churches, seminaries, and Christian-based institutions have been destroyed. 12 northern states enforce Sharia law, which includes blasphemy provisions, while there are also federal-level laws criminalizing blasphemy. Blasphemy laws, in practice, have been used to justify mob justice and violence. Examples of violence include large massacres, kidnappings, and displacement of Christian communities. Implications of the bill: if passed into law, several immediate and longer-term implications can be expected. Some of them are intended by the bill, others are potential consequences or risks. Intended, potential positive outcomes. 1. Accountability and pressure on officials. Nigerian federal and state government leaders, law enforcement, judicial officers, and others could face real costs, asset freezes, travel bans, diplomatic pressure. This may force them to change policies, blasphemy enforcement, Sharia application, or to act more aggressively against violent non-state actors. 2. International signal moral pressure. Designating Nigeria as a CPC is a strong diplomatic message. It highlights failures and abuses, raising the issue in bilateral relations and potentially among multilateral bodies. It may push Nigeria to improve protection of religious minorities, to avoid diplomatic isolation or adverse reputational effects. 3. Support for religious minorities. Christian and other religious minorities may receive more visible support from U.S. governmental and non-governmental actors, possibly leading to more humanitarian assistance, pressure on Nigeria to investigate abuses, prosecute perpetrators, or reform laws. 4. Maintaining counter-terrorism focus. By mandating the designations of Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa continue, the bill ensures that U.S. counter-terrorism attention remains on these extremist groups. This may translate into continued aid, intelligence cooperation, or sanctions targeting these organizations and their networks. Possible risks, gaps, or criticisms. 1. Omission of key violent actors. A number of critics have pointed out that the bill does not explicitly name or sanction Fulani ethnic militias, sometimes called Fulani herdsmen/militias, who are widely reported to be responsible for a large share of Christian fatalities, particularly in the Middle Belt. 2. Government pushback, sovereignty issues. The Nigerian government has already rejected some of Cruz's claims and the premise of the bill. Officials say the claims are malicious, contrived lies, and argue that violence is not being directed by religion, but is due to terrorism, banditry, or communal conflict. 3. Diplomatic and aid consequences. Being designated a CPC can lead to restrictions on U.S. aid, non-humanitarian, military cooperation, or other forms of bilateral assistance. This could have broader negative effects on Nigeria, especially if cooperation on security, counterterrorism, or health are impeded. There is also risk of Nigeria pushing back harder, limiting cooperation. 4. Implementation and enforcement challenges. Sanctions, asset freezes, and travel bans depend heavily on accurate identification of culpable individuals, good intelligence, diplomatic cooperation, and legal processes. If misapplied, or if evidence is weak, could lead to diplomatic tensions, accusations of unfairness, or simply be ineffective. 5. Retrospective sanctions sensitivity. The retrospective clause, 10 years, could generate controversy. It could target officials who believed they were acting under legal or cultural norms of their time, or who arguably had limited capacity. There could be pushback over fairness. 6. Risk of exacerbating tensions. The bill may inflame religious, political, or regional tensions in Nigeria if it's viewed as foreign interference or perceived as favoring Christians over Muslims, etc. Could be used by domestic actors to frame a religious narrative or victimization, possibly with unintended backlash. Reactions and controversies. Nigerian government. It has rejected the allegations as false and inflammatory. The presidency's spokesman has said there is no religious war in Nigeria, that terrorists attack people regardless of religion, and that Christianity is not being targeted specifically. Christian and human rights organizations, these groups have welcomed the bill as overdue and necessary. They see it as giving teeth to claims of persecution that have often been acknowledged in reports but without strong international action. Critics and gaps noted. The biggest criticism is omission of the Fulani militias from the list of groups or actors being held accountable. Many see the Fulani militia violence as central to the Christian deaths in rural Nigeria, so leaving them out is seen as a major gap. What it means in practice: If passed, certain named Nigerian officials might find their foreign assets frozen, be barred from entering the U.S., etc. Nigeria's status in U.S. Foreign policy would shift. As a CPC, it would be under more scrutiny in human rights reports, possibly less bipartisan goodwill in foreign aid or security cooperation unless reforms are made, could influence how other countries or multilateral institutions respond. U.S. designations often have ripple effects. Others could follow or raise similar sanctions or policies.